So welcome to another midweek conversation. I don't know why, but I missed one last week. I think it was just the chaos of the week. But this week I'm back on track and really pleased to welcome Pat Mayrick to share with me in conversation. So welcome, Pat. Nice to see you. We've been following these words. I've been asking people to sort of summarize their life of faith in 3 words. What is your first word for us today?
Well, he actually said I could use, sort of a phrase. So it's 2 words actually, and it's second chance.
And why did you choose that word, second chance?
Because I did have a second chance. So shall I go back to the beginning?
Yeah.
As they say?
Yeah.
I was an only child. It was a happy childhood. My mum was a really good Christian, and I was brought up in a Christian family. Went to Sunday school, and in those days, most of the social life revolved around, chapel. So yeah, things were pretty good as a child. But from being very, very tiny, the only thing I ever wanted to do was be a nurse. And I know it wasn't for any reasons of, being kind to humanity or anything. It was just I wanted to be a nurse. And it never left me. School was not really good for me. It was, I was as thick as pudding, to put it bluntly, and didn't really do very well at anything at all. And at 16, I became a cadet, what was in those days a cadet nurse, which basically it was a gopher and a, run here, do there, do that, do the other, and all the rest of it. But we spent 2 days a week in college being prepared for nurse training. And I suppose it's the first time that academically I'd found anything really that I liked and that I could do because I was interested. And at 18, I went into proper nurse training. But during that time, I'd made a lot of new friends. And in that sort of job, people were very, very close-knit. You supported each other, and there was a whole gang of us, and we loved the job. We had fun. We went out. We didn't have a lot of spare time, but life was pretty good. It was hard, but it was good. And church didn't just come into it in any way, shape or form. Things went on. I did quite well with nursing and passed all my exams, and had a good job and everything. Got married, had 2 kids. Life moves on, as they say, and still, church didn't come into this life at all. Everything was going smoothly. Everything was pretty good, and that was fine. As some people know, my husband was an alcoholic. Now, I'm not really sure when I actually realised that this was so. I think I'd closed my eyes to it for a long time. I didn't want to face it. And I don't want to really go into the nitty-gritty of this, but it's enough to say that life was pretty grim and pretty awful at times. And then during the last year of his life, I was pretty desperate, and I went to an Al-Anon meeting, which is, as most people probably know, 12-step program to help people who are living with people with alcohol problems. And I think that was where my journey of my second chance began. The 12 steps talk a lot about the God of your understanding. And I didn't have a problem with this, that, I hadn't been to church in donkey's years, but I did believe there was a God, and I did believe in God. And it started me questioning, and it started me, I'm going to read the Bible. So, right, from start to finish, start at Genesis part and go all the way through, which was an absolute mistake because half of the Old Testament meant nothing to me whatsoever, and I hated all the cruelty to the animals in it. However, I persevered and I did that, and certain things jumped out and spoke to me, and I started to, I don't suppose it was proper praying, but it was talking to God about how I felt and how things were, and what was he going to do about it, basically. And I did a lot of praying for peace, both for me and for my husband and for my family. And then 16 years ago, this past November, my husband died. And to be honest, it was like a great weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And I felt guilty that I felt like this. But nevertheless, I was honest, and I was honest to God and said that was how I felt. And what I did come to realise was that when I'd prayed for peace, the only way that we could get peace was through death. And, you know, hopefully he found peace, and certainly the rest of us did. So this was my new start, basically. And I have a great friend, Josette Smith, who you probably all know. And Jo said to me, look, Pat, it's coming up to Christmas. Don't be on your own at Christmas. You know, come to me. So, and I knew that she'd been to a midnight service somewhere for a couple of years. And I said, no, I'm fine on Christmas Day, but I would like to go to church on Christmas Eve. So Jo, being Jo, said, oh, come and we'll have a meal together and then we'll go. Now, I mean, I live in Wakefield, and although I'd worked in Barnsley, I didn't really by then know my way around too well. And of course, it was pitch black. And we pulled up at church and I went in, and it was Emmanuel. And it wasn't what I expected at all. It wasn't the church I remembered from the many, many years past when I'd been in a church. It felt warm, it was light, it was bright, it was friendly. It felt like I needed to be there. And I came away feeling good. And I felt that I wanted to go back. So I started going to the Sunday morning services. And it was a bit difficult at times. It brought back a lot of memories. But I wanted to be there. But because I was still working, and I worked weekends quite a bit, on the weekends when I worked, I couldn't go, and I missed that. And somebody said to me, well, try Sunday at 7. It's, you know, it's different, might not be your cup of tea, but, you know, give it a whirl. Well, that was it. I was just blown away by Sunday at 7, because at that time it was a very, very vibrant, busy service with worship leaders and a big music group. And I loved the worship songs. I loved everything about it. And when the banner went up outside to say that they was doing Alpha, yes, sign me up for that. And sign me up for this. Yes, I wanted to be involved. And on the first Alpha, that was when I actually realised that Jesus was a proper person. To me, it had been, I knew all the stories of Jesus from my childhood, but to me, there were stories, and it wasn't almost not real, really. So that was when things started to change. But during this time as well, I reconnected with friends, because for the last few years, I'd kind of kept the cards close to my chest. I didn't want to discuss what was going on at home. I didn't want people to know I was ashamed, and I all the wrong feelings, I realise now. But anyway, that was how it was. So I reconnected with friends, and I have a lot of friends, and went on holiday with some of them, and you know, life was good, and I felt as if I was moving on. So actually, that brings me to my second word, and I haven't shut up yet. So, is there anything you want to say, Cameron?
I mean, I love that concept of the second chance, and what I hope people hear is that no matter what you've gone through, what age your situation is, God is a God who wants us all to take the opportunity of a second chance. And there are opportunities for all of us, you know, that God comes to us, and it's being open, isn't it? And you were open, you know, despite a really, really difficult time, you were open to that, and and somebody else was also instrumental in giving you the invitation to come and see. So those two things together, I think, are really important. So yeah, move on to your second word.
Freedom. Now, if you've never read the book The Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, you are missing an extremely good read. And I'm not for 1 minute comparing my circumstances to his whatsoever, so please don't think that. But it's just the words of The Long Walk to Freedom, because that is how I felt I'd been on a long walk that had got me to being free. I was free from fear. I wasn't scared of what was happening, what had happened, or what was going to happen, or the consequences of what had happened. That didn't, and that is how I'd been before. I was free to go out and meet my friends with nothing to hide. Free to go on holidays and generally have a good time. Free to be going to church as and how I pleased. And it was a walk. It was a walk into freedom, and it was a good feeling. If I looked back, which I tend not to do very much, I can realise how difficult and how damaging some of those years had been. But I really do thank God that I'm able to let go of it without any bad feelings or any hostilities, or I can just feel as if I can let it go. It's part of my life. It's part of my past. You can't get away from that, but it really doesn't matter anymore. And then things started to happen. My first grandchild was born. My daughter got engaged. And both my son and my daughter are both married now, with, in very, very happy relationships with their spouses. And I've got 5 granddaughters, some of them who are taller than me now. That was good. I paid off my mortgage, which was a major step, because you've no idea how much alcohol can cost when somebody's going through it at a great rate of knots. And I felt that my life was being blessed. So that was the freedom bit. Moving on, enjoying life, things being very, very different, and being able to let go, quite frankly.
I find that really interesting, that the freedom for you was an acceptance of what had happened, not to make you bitter, but in order to allow that to become a springboard for you to become more the person that God intended you to be, and to be happy and content in that person. Because it can take people either way, can't it? As people look back, they can become very bitter, and sad that they've missed out on so much. But your looking back has then spurred you forward to enjoy even more freedom, because you've accepted what's happened, and you are desiring to be a new person in the light of the second chance that Jesus has given you, and that's brought you a joy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Which probably just brings, I'm probably preempting you a bit here, and I don't mean to, but it brings me to the third word, which is hope. And for quite a lot of years, I'd got no hope in my life at all. I could not see what the future was going to hold. And certainly I couldn't see that it was going to be anything good. During all this time, I worked full time, and that probably kept my sanity. But I can remember it won't be the first time, because the first time I read the Old Testament, it just kind of like, but I can remember reading Jeremiah. I know the plans I have for you. And it, again, I will never forget those words, and the first time that they meant anything to me. Because the thing is about coming to know Jesus is suddenly you understand things better. And things that I just thought, I don't know what they're on about. Suddenly I thought, I quite get that now. I've still a long way to go, but I sometimes you can get it. So yeah, I've got hope for the future. Okay, I'm knocking on in years, and you can't say, well, I've got a long time left, but I have got a hope for the future. I've got hope for my family. They're happy, they're settled. The girls are all okay. And it's just a lack of being fear. I love that song, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God, and it's just one of my favourite worship songs. So to actually come from where I've been to freedom and to hope has been a long walk, but the last 16 years of it have been absolutely amazing. And, you know, every morning, I feel, I've read it somewhere, God opens the windows of heaven and pours his blessings down on you. And that's how I feel every morning when I get up. Okay, sometimes I don't feel like getting out of bed, and sometimes I don't feel like doing much of anything, but basically, my life is a big blessing. Don't know what else to say now, Cameron.
Sorry, I was just unmuted. If somebody is listening to this today and, you know, they're going through a really tough time, what would you say to them in terms of faith and Jesus, to give them hope, as it were, for the future?
I think when you're in a dark place, I'm very, very uneducated about mental health, so I don't really profess to know a lot about that. But I think if you're in a dark place, it can feel an impossible task to get out of that. So a lot of what I would say is what I've thought maybe in retrospect is that all the time that I was just hanging on by a thread, Jesus was hanging on to me by my hand. And that is how I realise now I got through it. I didn't know him, but he knew me. And he never let go. I mean, since I've felt it differently, in the, you know, a couple of years ago when I fractured my hip and things weren't straightforward, and well, it's a long story, but I was in and out of hospital, and I never ever felt afraid, and I never ever felt on my own, although I mean I was on my own quite a lot. It didn't feel like that. I felt that I would be okay, and that didn't come from me. That
So what
came from,
yeah. So what you're saying to
when I
people
went to, sorry.
So what you're saying to
No,
people
sorry.
is that knowing Jesus means that
Mm.
the hope that you have, even if you're on your own, even if you're going through a tough time, even when you're hanging on by your fingertips, still gives you the assurance that he's hanging on to you and that he's with you, and that therefore you are not alone.
Yeah. When I first went to Al-Anon, they've got the signs up on the wall all the way around, and it's things like "Let go and let God" and "One day at a time," and I can't think of any more right now. But they began to mean something to me over the period of time, and it's hard to put your trust in anything when you're at your wit's end, and to know that, you know, the plans that God has for you are plans for give you hope in the future. But I used to walk around with saying things like, I don't know, I can't remember them now, but I'd pick up a Bible verse. There was all things work together for good, and I used to want all things work together for good. Remember that all things work, just to try and you know, think positively.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's really not easy. And my advice to people again would be, don't do what I did and keep it all to yourself. Talk to someone.
Yeah.
Talk to someone, particularly someone who can probably empathise with that. I've tried to help in a very, very limited way. I've done, when I first, I stopped going to Al-Anon because it was too depressing once I'd moved on. But I did do a couple of talks for AA, was asked to do, and that I felt as if was useful for people. And I've tried to support one or two people I know who've gone through similar situations to myself. But everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different. But I can only say never give up, because God will never give up on you.
Yeah, and I think the remarkable thing that I find from your story is that despite what you've gone through and that whole sort of, difficult patch, it has been used. It's been used for good for other people. So whilst it's very traumatic for you and, you carry the burden of that, actually, it then becomes a blessing for others because they gain from your insight and from your support and from your encouragement and from your empathy. And God can weave everything in our lives to bring about his good. And, I really echo what you say about that memory verse. I think that's a great memory verse. And that's what Bible memory verses are all about, aren't they? It's about having something that you can hold on to, something very concrete in the midst of everything else that's falling apart, knowing that God is with you and that God is our hope and our strength.
I think as well, sometimes things are meant to be. If I hadn't gone to Al-Anon, I may not have started on my long walk to freedom, so to speak. It was a reintroduction into some kind of faith. I also met some very, very nice people, two of whom are still extremely good friends, and we keep in touch, and I wouldn't have met them if I hadn't gone. So although it was for a limited time span that I was involved in that, I think it was an essential part of something for me. It wasn't something I'd particularly planned. It wasn't something I particularly looked forward to doing, but I think it was something that maybe was in God's long-term plan. It's like when I went to Emmanuel on Christmas Eve, I could have gone anywhere. It could have been anywhere. I didn't know where I was going to for midnight service. But once I was there, I'm not saying that Emmanuel is unique in any way, shape or form in that respect, but once I was there, I felt that it was where I was meant to be.
Yeah,
and
you belonged.
And if I hadn't gone on the Alpha course, if I hadn't gone to Emmanuel, I wouldn't have seen the big banner outside. I wouldn't have gone on the Alpha course. I wouldn't have met the people that I met on Alpha who became some of my dearest friends. And I certainly wouldn't have met with the risen Jesus, I don't think, either. So I think we've got to make decisions about what to do, but I think that there's a long-term plan for most of us, for all of us, I should say, that, God is in control at the end of the day. And that's what I think about this pandemic at the moment. God is in ultimate control. And when the time is right, it will be over. Yes, we've got our part to play. God's given us the ability, well, not me, but the scientists and the medics and the government has given them the ability to deal with it. It's a God-given ability. And yes, it will come to an end, but we've got to remember that it's not necessarily us that will end it. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, and I think God often nudges us in a way, because his long-term hope and plan for us is for our flourishing, the best life that we can live. And God isn't the divine dampener, wanting us to be miserable and have a bad life. He wants us to have life in all its fullness, both now and for all eternity. So, the God that we believe in is a God of hope and a God of freedom, because he wants the best for us. So thank you, Pat, for sharing 3 words with me this morning. Really, really great words. Second chance, freedom and hope. And I hope that as people listen to your story and maybe hear echoes of their own story in what you've said, or have been challenged, by what you've said, I hope that they know, similarly as you and I do, a God who offers us a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance, but also a God, absolutely, but also a God who wants for us to have fullness of freedom in the Holy Spirit's power and know the hope that we have that is ours in Jesus Christ. So thank you very much for sharing so honestly this morning and so powerfully. been a blessing for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron.